Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 1st of August, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can do that easily by going to weather.gov/Alaska, listening to your NOAA weather radio or your Marine VHF, or giving us a call at 1-800-472-0391. That's the Alaska Weather Information Line, and you can just dial up your forecast any time of day or night. If you don't find what you're looking for, feel free to send me an email at david.snider@noaa.gov. That's a great way to reach me any time of day, and I'll try and reply just as fast as I can and help you solve your problem, whether it's something you're looking for, something that doesn't work, or something you just don't enjoy about the show or you'd like to see more of. I'm happy to listen to that and see what I can do anytime. Here's a look at the hazardous weather situation across Alaska this afternoon, and it's mainly due to too much rain or too much water already on the ground. Let's start out east, where we were talking about the road toward Tetland Road. The Tanana River is up above its banks in some places there, and because of the extra water flowing there, it's cut off the road, making that impassable, and that's expected to continue at least through the end of the week, and there is more rain moving through, so that will only exacerbate or make worse the problems that are already there. So not a whole lot of change expected there on the Tetland Road. As you head out to the west, the Kobuk, Noatak, and Atlanta River is expected to come up. Flood advisories posted there as well as out around the Tetland Road. And that's mainly due to about an inch of rain that's already fallen out west, and there's a weather system coming in that's probably going to bring in at least another inch, maybe 2 inches of rainfall through the middle of the week. So already higher than normal conditions there on the Kobuk, Noatak, and Atlanta rivers. But we expect to see that the rivers coming up even more. And on top of that, smaller streams in the region that feed into those will likely come up fairly quickly as well in the next 24 to 48 hours. So as we get into your Wednesday, into your Thursday, be mindful of what the rivers are doing where you are, whether you're going out fishing or just heading up the stream a little bit. Make sure you have a plan to get back to where you need to be and be prepared for changing weather conditions because of the higher water levels there in those main stem rivers, Kobuk, Noatak, and Atlanta rivers, but also the smaller streams especially will suffer some impacts from that. So just be careful and be on your guard if you're in the northwestern interior out toward the Kotzebue Sound region because of heavier rain on the way. Now, the other side of that is places that have not seen a whole lot of rain are still dealing with higher than normal fire danger across the Yukon Flats especially, and out across the tundra, the northern coast there, extreme fire danger. Things are still pretty crispy in those regions, just haven't seen a whole lot of precipitation, and they usually don't, right? But even in south central areas and in toward the interior in the Tanana Valley, things are generally on the higher than normal dry side. But another wave of rain is coming, so this will probably get healed up fairly quickly. And regions up across the Yukon Flats will also have a better chance of seeing some rainfall as we get into the mid to latter part of the week. So watch for changes there if you're tracking the fire danger in your community. And as always, it's always a good idea to check with local officials and whoever's in charge of letting you know is fire okay or not okay before you start to burn something, including those burn barrels. Here's a look at the visible satellite picture. A little wonky today because it's that time of the year where we get some satellite interruptions as the seasons begin to hint of change, so not a big surprise we get that sometimes. But you can see on the visible satellite picture that there is a wealth of cloud cover across the southern 2/3 of Alaska. One exception would be across the southern half of southeast. And guess what the temperatures did today? Well into the upper 60s and lower 70s. Just a beautiful day across southern southeast. You can see a gentle south and southeasterly breeze working in as well. Plenty of clouds across south central, just a little bit of light rain there today. The main weather system is still out across the west, and it's going to be reinvigorated time and again by new weather waves that are working in, pretty much moving from west to east across the Bering and the Pacific. So here's the first one already moving in across the west coast, and you can see the infrared satellite picture is suffering the same sickness here as the previous version. Out across the southern Bering Sea, another puff of moisture will move in across the Bering and into the west coast. And as we go through the next couple days, yet another wave will follow this. So we have one situation that's already brought us up to about an inch of rain in some parts of western Alaska. Another wave that could push in another inch or so, a half inch to 1 inch in some locations, and then another one behind that that might do exactly the same thing. So this is a pretty soggy weather system, and it's going to bring in amounts of moisture in a short amount of time that a little bit on the unusual side there. So it's going to be wet, and you're probably going to notice it the most if you're on the West Coast community. So Kotzebue Sound down toward Nome, Norton Sound, all the way across the southwest into Bethel and all the surrounding villages there, and into Bristol Bay. You'll eventually get some of that. Now, high pressure right now is sitting across south central at 1,029 millibars. That's fairly strong, but it hasn't been enough to really squash away the clouds. So we didn't get a whole lot of sunshine or shower activity in many places today. But across the Gulf, a weak wave of low pressure here is kind of falling apart already. And as we get into tonight, the core of high pressure will shift to the south and southeast. That could push some light rainfall into Prince William Sound and northern parts of southeast. Notice that southern southeast is still fairly dry, so you should stay on a drier side going into tomorrow. One wave of low pressure is already working across the west and the lower and middle Yukon Valley, as well as the Kuskokwim Valley. The core of the circulation is moving up across the north coast, but already a second one is coming in across the southern Bering. This is going to push more moisture and more heat across south and western Alaska and really help to get that southerly flow moving back up into the Chukchi Sea and keep things fairly mild there. Here's a look at Wednesday, and you'll notice that first disturbance really isn't moving very quickly. We'll still have some kind of slop moving its way in across the northern Gulf, but southern southeast stays dry. Better chance for rainfall across more parts of south central and the Kenai Peninsula tomorrow. Notice the Copper River Basin doesn't really get in on that full moisture flow here. So areas from, let's say, Delta to Glen Allen, and then northward all the way up toward Eagle, a little bit more showery, probably warmer, maybe even Fort Yukon. You'll be right there on the edge. All the way out toward southwest in the Capes, Nunivak Island, southward toward Cape Newenham, Bristol Bay, Pilot Point, Port Hayden. You'll be very close to the rain, if not in it. And across the central chain, that west and southwesterly flow will be switching around for you as we get into Wednesday. Here's Thursday, and notice that high pressure now has moved a little bit further west in the Gulf. And low pressure, that second system, is kind of stalling out, but it's also collecting more of that southerly flow. So between the high pressure system working in the clockwise fashion and low pressure working in that counterclockwise fashion, we really get this big convergence of moisture moving air up pretty much south to north across the western half of Alaska. And with that, without a lot of movement of either one of these systems, we're kind of locked in this flow as we get into Thursday and early parts of Friday. And that means it's going to rain a lot, especially across the western coast. So be prepared again for several inches of rain across the west coast. Right now, only flood advisories up around places around the Kobuk, Noatak valleys and the Atlantic River, looking at some higher than normal rises there, as well as some of the local streams. And of course, the Tetland Road still suffering some issues there. And any more rain will only make that a little bit worse around the Tanana River. So rain's on the way in the west. Here's a look at the temperatures now today. Like I said, pretty warm in southern southeast, mid-60s to lower 70s, and I think you can pretty much pick out where it was a little sunny today, from Metlakatla to Craig, Ketchikan, Annette, and Hyder, all 72. Even Juneau popped up to 70 degrees by the 3 o'clock hour, so not too bad at all. Prince William Sound, though, a little bit cooler under rain clouds and upper 50s there. Seward was about 57 degrees, Homer 62, Kenai 64 degrees, lower 60s around the Anchorage Bowl to Wasilla, Talkeetna, and Palmer. In the mid to upper 70s as you get out toward Tok and Chicken, as well as Northway. 66 around Fairbanks, it was 67 in Eagle. And as you get out across Rainy Pass, even Squentna, places out across Puntilla, temperatures there range from the 50s all the way up to about 70 degrees around Stony River. 66 again around Fairbanks, up toward the mid to upper 60s for Fort Yukon, Arctic Village, lower 50s there, Anaktuvik Pass 57. And once you get over the hills and back into the low country again, lower to mid 60s there across the tundra, 40s and 50s for the coast. However, Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse were warm, and that'll be important tomorrow too as that front's moving through, because if it's warm enough and unstable enough, you might get some thunder and lightning in the region, and that is in your forecast around Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse tomorrow. Of course, that could affect your operation, so keep an eye on the weather. 40s and 50s around the northwest coast into Kotzebue Sound, where it warms up to about 49 in Kivalina, 54 in Shishmaref, and 51 around Nome. Norton Sound temperatures back in the mid-50s, 59 around Galena. And Bethel, you're looking at 56. Bristol Bay temperatures were in the lower 60s today. Lake Iliamna, a little bit on the cooler side, 57 for Kodiak, and 50s and 60s throughout the Alaska Peninsula. Sandpoint was 56, a little cooler out toward Atka. St. Paul and St. George in the mid-50s today. Now, overnight lows will stay in the upper 40s to mid-50s for most of the Yukon Valley as well as the Kuskokwim Valley. Bristol Bay in the lower 50s, Kodiak 53, South Central lower 50s as well. Milder for central and southern parts of Southeast, some places in the upper 50s overnight. Mid-40s for most of the Chukchi Seacoast. Nome, you're looking at 47 and a high of 53 tomorrow. For the middle Tanana Valley and the upper Tanana Valley, mid-60s to mid-70s. This will be the hottest region tomorrow. But again, with temps in the mid-60s tomorrow across the Arctic coast, there is a risk for some isolated thunderstorm activity. So keep your eye on that. Again, be safe on the north coast. For the morning hours tomorrow, watch for widespread IFR across southwest all the way to the central and western chain and wrapping around low pressure in the Gulf as well as the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range. This is where that rain is really going to focus overnight and again tomorrow. Notice that improves a little bit by the afternoon. There's our risk for showers and thunderstorms across the Beaufort Seacoast and across the Bering Sea. IFR continues to rule today and also from Cordova to just past Yakutat in the afternoon. Pass conditions look like this. Anaktuvik Pass and Adigan Pass will start out at IFR with some rain in the region. Some of that could be heavy at times, but look for some improvement and improvement in visibility and ceiling by the afternoon tomorrow. MVFR conditions will likely hold on through most of the day for Lake Clark and Merrill Pass and for Rainy Pass as that weather system moves in from the west. Windy Pass also looking to suffer visibility and deck tomorrow, down a little bit. MVFR conditions there for Isabel Pass. MVFR conditions should last throughout most of the day. Mentasta Pass is going to see more sunshine. You may see some showery weather in the afternoon, but VFR conditions through most of the day. Tanita Pass, we expect to see MVFR through most of your Wednesday. Portage Pass, MVFR for the pass itself. IFR conditions probably holding out through most of the Sound. And Chilkoot and White Pass, we expect to see marginal conditions developing as we go through your Wednesday afternoon. Here's a look at freezing levels now, and some of the coldest air we have in the states up across northwestern Alaska. And as this weather system tracks eastward, it's being replaced by very warm and wet air across the west coast. There has been a cool pool of air out across the Gulf. That's being mixed up right now and is gradually going away. Most of the state is looking at freezing levels between 6 and about 10,000, even 12,000 feet in some places as you head out into southeast. Icing potential is certainly going to be an issue as we go ahead in the next, or really the rest of the week. But remember, we've got a lot of warm air in place too, so you're going to have to climb up fairly high to really get into any significant icing. Right now, I put the levels as low as about 9,000 feet, but you may find that they're even higher tomorrow. So go in with a hint of optimism, I guess. But make sure you check the very latest as conditions will be changing as rain starts to move in from west to east throughout the day. But that plume of moisture will really be focusing across the Aleutians, southwest and central Alaska and the north coast as we go in through your Wednesday and Thursday with not a whole lot of movement toward the end of the week. Here's a look at the jet stream now, and low pressure is focused out across the southern Bering Sea. The very fast-moving river Ver here has speeds up to about 100 knots or so across the Aleutians, and that zips right into southwestern Alaska. It's being helped by that northern branch of the jet stream coming into northern Alaska. Wind speeds there not quite as strong, but this west and southwesterly flow is perfect for grabbing moisture over the Bering, which of course has no ice to cover it up right now, and across the north and western Pacific. So the moisture pump is certainly primed, and that flow is really what western Alaska needs to get into the rain weather pattern there. Low pressure across the Gulf has another disturbance that's trying to kind of move things into the central Gulf, but this will start to creep eastward just a little bit more. Of interest too, if you're heading down south, is high heat with high pressure working across the west coast. It looks like this is a fairly warm pattern for most of the lower 48 states. In the meantime, at 9,000 feet, you can see that broad southwesterly flow again, working moisture into the west coast. Wind speeds here anywhere from 20 to about 30 knots across the interior. Fairly light across the upper Tanana Valley into the 40-mile country, south central, and most of southeast looking at 10 to 15 knot winds. There's high pressures trying to slow things down just a little bit. At 3,000 feet, now we start to get into a few more pressure centers showing up here across the central Bering Sea, 10 to 15 knots, low pressure up across the Arctic as well. That's all encouraging that southwesterly flow to move through. Just north of the Alaska Range, wind speeds are running around 25 to 30 knots. Wind speeds are slower across the Gulf Coast and south of the Alaska Peninsula, 10 to about 25 knots tops. With high pressure across the eastern Gulf, we have very light winds coming in from the north across most of the central and southern inner channels of southeast. Here's a look at turbulence then. Finally, we would expect that we're going to start to see some more thumps and bumps across the interior, generally north of the Alaska Range to about the Brooks Range. And this could be below 5,000 feet tomorrow, so keep your eyes on the changing conditions again as we have one weather disturbance that's just going to creep eastward across the interior. This could line up some faster moving winds here across the interior. So some occasional moderate certainly possible. And across the Aleutians, similar conditions there as the west and southwesterly flow rumbles over below about 4,000 feet. Watch for a little bit of some gap winds here across the Dixon entrance region, some of that a little bit closer to the surface. But your main and more widespread issues will likely be developing across the interior and ongoing across the Aleutians for your daytime tomorrow, and the southwestern Cape should be included in that. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'm back with your sea ice edge and your marine weather here in just a few minutes. Stay tuned.
Hi, I'm Mr. Bale. One of the nicest things about this business is the fact that you meet so many great people and become really good friends over the years. And it just happens that Mr. Bale is one of those people who I consider one of my great friends. Mo is from Transport Canada. He never turns us down unless he's got a conflict in a schedule. And we've had him up here, excuse me, several times. We always just enjoy him thoroughly. And with that, I'll say welcome back again, Mo.
Well, thank you very much, Jenny. Very kind introduction. It does kind of set a pace that may be difficult to keep up with here, but we'll do the best that we can. It's gratifying to see so many faces in the group today. Nice for pilots to all get together and share ideas, I guess. I better get some electronic wizardry started here and remind me not to look into that light again. Wow. My name is Mo Bale. I'm what they call a regional aviation safety officer. When you work for the federal government in Canada, you get called a lot of different things, okay? Believe me. But I'm going to accept Mo, so you can just call me that if you like, and I would appreciate that. Now, the regional aviation safety officer, the region that I'm specifically tasked with developing and presenting programs such as this, is not unique, but there's a reason why I'm here, and one of those reasons is that my region borders on Alaska. It also borders on Montana, and I do similar programs for them in the lower 48. The region is bordered by the Alcan Highway, okay, so that it falls entirely within my region. That's one of the ways that it's set up geographically. So I cover all of the province of Alberta, the western half of the Northwest Territories and the Arctic, all of the Yukon Territory, and a little northeastern corner of British Columbia. They like to think of themselves as being Albertans anyway. And we do too. They're pretty good. Now the branch that I work for in Transport Canada is called the System Safety Branch. We used to be called Aviation Safety Programs, but because of some changes to the, not specific duties, but some additional requirements of our branch within, they found that the name System Safety was probably defined our duties just a little bit more accurately. The closest liaison that I have is exactly with Joel Wilcox with safety programs with the FAA. That's a very close comparison. The mission that I have is similar as well, and it's a mission that's probably shared by most pilots, actually, whether you think of it that way or not. And it's to actively search for safety hazards and develop programs of accident prevention. I have a lot of people helping me to do that, people inside the department and people outside the department as well, the sharing of information, if you would. The presentation tonight deals with safety. It deals with judgment, primarily pilot judgment. So that's where the focus is going to be. But to begin with, I'd like to put up a definition of safety, where the responsibilities lie, if you would, that it is in fact the responsibility of the flight crew, and more specifically, and in most cases, the pilot in command. The definition here infers that there's a skill requirement, that as a skilled pilot gains experience through the years, their ability to exercise good judgment will increase. And that's true. I concentrate on judgment and the decision-making type of thing, judgment being the key element in the decision-making process, but not to the exclusion of attaining and maintaining a very high degree of skill in your chosen field, your endeavor. The stick and rudder skills, all the other skills that go along with flying an airplane must be there first, and then you use those as a basis to make good judgments. Occasionally, and when I say occasionally, it's rare, but it happens, that pilots will use the word judgment as an excuse for not maintaining a high level of skill. You really cannot trade one for the other, if you can get my understanding. You have to attain and maintain that high level of skill first. So please do that and ensure that it's there as well. And then, with experience, judgment becomes better. It's important for us as pilots to recognize that there's a very delicate balance that exists in our recreation or our field of career or whatever else it may be. Are there some professional pilots in the crowd, or pretty well all general aviation? Is there a mix? Who flies for a living? Couple? Anybody fly helicopters? Anybody a rotary wing pilot? Joel? Oh, sit up front so I don't have to talk loud. Okay? Yeah. No, I hate to make jokes about helicopter pilots. They have enough trouble, don't they? All those moving parts. Holy cow.
He never calls on me from the back. I don't know why. Today's sea ice edge looks like this. Wow, a lot of open water. There's still some marginal ice there, concentrations less than 80%. North of the central Beaufort Sea coast and Dead Horse there. We got some larger concentrations of pack ice, some of this a multi-year ice, well north of the coast, but a lot of this that will be moving from east to west with the later weather conditions we're expecting here, but this is also moving into warmer waters, so a lot of this will break up as it moves from east to west. But as you can see, not a whole lot of hindrance there in the navigational regions right now across the North Slope. You can always get the very latest information anytime you want at weather.gov/Anchorage/ice and check out the latest outlook while you're there. Here's a look at the forecast now for southeast. Wind should stay pretty light, more of a southeasterly flow in Stevens Passage, 10 knots, 2-foot seas there, 15 knots through the Clarence Strait. A little bit of a stronger flow up through the Lynn Canal as you head up toward Haines and Skagway, 20 knots with a 4-foot sea. Southerlies outside of Gustavus and Cross Sound, 15 knots, 6-foot seas on the outer coast. And more of an onshore flow south of Sitka, though fairly light, 10 knots and 5 to 6-foot seas there for tomorrow. As we get into Thursday, north and northwesterly winds coming down the outer coast, 15 to 20, 4 to 5-foot seas there on Thursday. And the winds pick up on the inside, 20 to 25 from Stevens Passage into the Lynn Canal. Look for 5-foot seas around the Lynn Canal and 4-foot seas around the Clarence Strait region with those northwesterlies at 20 knots. Inside Prince William Sound, 15 knots on Wednesday, for Wednesday with a 3-foot sea. Southerlies inside the Cook Inlet region also looking at 15 knots and 3-foot seas. Southwesterlies inside of Shelikof Strait, light winds on the north and western Gulf, and even a little bit of a variable flow throughout the day east of Kodiak Island on 10 knots. Thursday, it'll be a little bit different. 15 to 20 knots start coming in from the south and east. Inside of Prince William Sound, 10 knots and 2-foot seas. Light and variable winds on the northern end of Cook Inlet. Over the Barrens, 20 knots, 5 to 6-foot seas there. 4-foot seas inside of Shelikof Strait and 6-foot seas coming into the eastern end of Kodiak Island. For the Bristol Bay region, southwesterlies, 15 knots and 4-foot seas. Southwesterlies across the Pacific, 10 to 20 with 5-foot seas there and 6-foot seas down the Bering Sea coast on a 25-knot wind. For Thursday, that'll continue. In fact, seas come up a little bit more to 7 feet. Southeasterlies inside of Bristol Bay keep the seas around 6-foot seas or so. 20 knots around most of the Pacific coast with a 6 to 8-foot sea for your Thursday as those southeasterlies pick up a little bit more. For Wednesday across the Aleutians, a broad southwesterly flow will remain in charge there. A little bit of a southerly turn there north of Unalaska and Nikolsky with an 8-foot sea on 25-knot winds, and variable winds out west 10 knots with 8-foot seas, 11-foot seas out toward Kiska to Adak. As you get into Thursday, that broad sweeping westerly flow will continue, and this will have another surge of rainfall with it as it reaches the western coast. So watch for some changes there and occasional poor visibility as those waves pass through, of course. 20 knots in most areas, 6 to 7-foot seas from Nikolsky to Unalaska, 7 to 9-foot seas across the Pacific, and 6-foot seas out west on that 20-knot westerly flow. Across the west coast, it's a southerly wind, and this is what's driving all the rainfall across the west. It's warm, it's wet, and it's moving parallel to the coastline here, so expect that to keep things pretty soggy Wednesday and Thursday. 15 to 20 knots most areas, a variable flow around St. Matthew, 25 knots around St. Paul and St. George with an 8-foot sea there on Wednesday, becoming westerly, and seas and winds diminish for the Pribilofs. Look for a light southeasterly flow north of Nunivak Island, but we're going to hold on to some stronger winds around the Capes and again in Bristol Bay as we just saw. 25 knots with 7-foot seas there and a light northerly wind coming across St. Lawrence Island, 15 knots with a 5-foot sea there for Thursday. For the north coast, look for 15 to 20 knots across the Beaufort there with 3 to 4-foot seas, up to 20 knots north of Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse. And don't forget, there is a risk of some thunderstorm activity in the region tomorrow. Southerlies across the Chukchi Sea, 10 to 20. Look for 2 to 4-foot seas on Wednesday, becoming stronger as we get into Thursday, 25 knots for any regions just west of Barrow, with 4 to 6-foot seas outside of Kotzebue Sound and up toward Point Lay, and across the Beaufort Seacoast 15 knots with an offshore flow and 3-foot seas, but northwesterlies will strengthen across the eastern Beaufort, 25 knots with a 6-foot sea on Thursday. Now, recapping tonight's weather, we've been talking about the rain. There's a flood advisory around the Noatak, Kobuk, and Atlanta rivers there. Looks like that's generally on the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range because of the steady southerly and very wet flow. So things are going to be very wet here. You've already seen about an inch in some cases, could see another 1 to 2 inches in those regions. The Tetland Road should remain also somewhat impassable, if not completely impassable, through the end of the week. Look for rain to continue across the west and the interior, and a rainy day in south central for your daytime tomorrow. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather. See you tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.